Gary Cooper is a name that instantly conjures images of classic Hollywood. Rugged, dependable, the quintessential American hero who dominated the silver screen from the 1930s through the 1950s. But behind that iconic smile and those unforgettable roles lies a story far darker and more complicated than most fans ever imagined. For decades, Cooper kept a silence about the harsh realities of Hollywood's golden age, a silence that's only recently begun to break. What was Gary Cooper hiding? Why did one of the most beloved figures in film history avoid speaking out about the industry's darkest corners? This is a story of how a legendary star, celebrated for his charm and integrity, grappled with the unseen struggles, secret power plays, and crushing pressures that define Tinseltown behind the glitz and glamour. You might think Hollywood's golden age was all glimmering premieres and star-studded parties, but the truth is far messier. For every dazzling film and award, there were shadowy deals, intense studio control, and a culture where speaking out could destroy your career overnight. Gary Cooper lived through it all, and now, decades after his prime, some of his most guarded thoughts and fears have finally surfaced. This isn't just about nostalgia or revisiting an old Hollywood legend. It's about uncovering the hidden battles faced by stars forced to play perfect roles not just on screen but off it. 2. Cooper's story reveals how fame can be both a shield and a prison, a truth that resonates far beyond his time. In this video, we'll explore the unseen side of Gary Cooper's life and career. We'll dive into why he chose silence for so long, the pressures that shaped his decisions, and the moments when he quietly pushed back against a system built on secrecy and control. You'll hear about the rumors and controversies that have circulated quietly for years, and why those whispers finally demand attention now. So buckle up. This is more than just a biography. It's a deep dive into Hollywood's underbelly through the eyes of one of its most iconic stars. What you're about to hear challenges everything you thought you knew about Gary Cooper, and it might change the way you see Hollywood itself. By the end, you'll wonder how much of what we see on screen is real, and how much is carefully crafted illusion. And more importantly, what happens to the people caught in between? Let's start peeling back the layers. Hollywood's golden age is often remembered as a time of magic. Sweeping romances, dazzling premieres, and stars larger than life. It's the era that gave us legends like Gary Cooper, whose charisma and rugged charm helped define what a leading man should be. But beneath the glittering surface, the reality was far from the fairy tale most people imagine. Studios back then didn't just produce movies. They controlled nearly every aspect of their stars' lives. From what actors could say in interviews to who they could date, and even how they were allowed to behave in public. The power rested firmly in the hands of studio executives. The system was ruthless, with studios investing millions in crafting perfect images for their stars, and punishing anyone who stepped out of line. Gary Cooper was no exception. Though he was known for his straightforward, honest screen presence, off-camera, he lived under a microscope. The studios carefully curated his image as the all-American hero, strong, silent, dependable, because that's what sold tickets. But that polished persona came at a cost. Actors were expected to hide their flaws, their struggles, and their dissent. They weren't just performers. They were products. Behind closed doors, the pressures were immense. Many stars struggled silently with personal demons, while the studios focused on maintaining control. Gossip was dangerous. It could end careers. And with the powerful studio heads watching every move, there was little room for rebellion or authenticity. It wasn't just about control either. Hollywood was also a hotbed of politics, rumors, and secret deals. Studios had connections to powerful figures in Washington, and stars were often pressured to take sides or stay quiet during turbulent times. This was especially true during the era of the Hollywood Blacklist, when accusations of political disloyalty could blackball an actor or director indefinitely. For Cooper, who valued his privacy and independence, this system was suffocating. Yet, he rarely spoke out publicly against it. Instead, he adapted and navigated the complex landscape with quiet resilience. He maintained his reputation, starred in some of the most memorable films of the time, and seemed to embody the ideal of the Hollywood hero. But underneath, the tension between who he was and what was expected of him grew stronger. Many stars from that era have since come forward with stories of exploitation and emotional strain, but Cooper's voice remained noticeably absent until recently. New interviews and rare clips have emerged, revealing a side of him few ever saw. A man deeply conflicted about the industry that made him famous. As we move forward, you'll hear about the hidden struggles Cooper faced, the battles he fought behind the scenes, and the unspoken truths about Hollywood's darker side that he was finally willing to hint at. It turns out that beneath the glamour, the golden age was built on a foundation of silence, sacrifice, and fear. But that wasn't the whole story. Cooper's silence wasn't just about protecting himself. It was about protecting others, and maybe even a system he quietly believed in. What happened next would shake Hollywood and challenge the legacy of its biggest stars. Gary Cooper's name was synonymous with strength, quiet dignity, and an almost effortless charm that made him the ideal leading man. But behind that image lay battles few ever heard about, struggles he carried alone, struggles that help explain why he stayed silent for so long about Hollywood's darker side. Cooper was a private man by nature, not given to public drama or outbursts. Yet, those closest to him whispered about the pressures he faced. In an industry that demanded perfection, he wrestled with personal challenges that didn't fit the clean-cut persona he portrayed on screen. Stories of his bouts with anxiety, deep loneliness, and moments of despair were rarely, if ever, spoken aloud during his lifetime. And when they were mentioned, it was always in hushed tones. One recurring theme was Cooper's struggle with mental health, something rarely discussed openly back then. The image of the unshakable hero made it difficult for him to admit vulnerability. But behind closed doors, those vulnerabilities bubbled beneath the surface. He lived in an environment where admitting weakness could mean the end of a career, so he kept his battles locked away. Adding to this was the growing pressure from the studios and the public's expectations. Cooper was constantly expected to be the man everyone wanted him to be, the dependable star who never faltered. That relentless demand for perfection weighed heavily on him, creating an internal conflict that no amount of fame could mask. Rumors also surfaced around struggles with substances, whispers about times when he might have used alcohol or other means to cope with the emotional weight of his life. Nothing was ever confirmed, and Cooper never publicly addressed these rumors, but they added another layer to the complexity of his silent fight. His relationships, too, reflected the strain. Cooper was married and had children, but those close to him describe a man who often kept his emotions guarded, unable to fully open up even to those he loved most. The star's stoicism was as much a shield as it was a part of his screen persona. All of this silence, his personal pain, the pressures from Hollywood, the rumors swirling in the background, combined into a wall that Cooper rarely let anyone breach. For decades, he maintained a perfect image, all while enduring battles that most fans would never have imagined. But why did he choose silence? Part of it was self-preservation. Of course, speaking out could ruin a career, and Cooper's was too valuable to risk. Another part might have been loyalty to the industry that gave him fame, to the studio system, and to the people he worked with. And perhaps there was also a deeper reason. He didn't want to expose the dark underbelly of Hollywood if it meant hurting others or dismantling the dreams of fans. It wasn't until decades later, as new interviews and footage have emerged, that we see Cooper breaking the silence in small but meaningful ways. He started hinting at the cost of fame, the loneliness behind the spotlight, and the compromises he had to make. What's surprising is how much Cooper's story echoes the struggles of so many stars then and now. Behind the glamour, the silence often hides pain, and sometimes the only way out is to finally speak up. And the pressures Cooper faced weren't just personal. The political climate of the time added even more layers to his silence. That's what we'll explore next: the Hollywood blacklist and the dark politics that shaped careers, including his own. The Hollywood of Gary Cooper's era wasn't just glamorous. It was also a battleground of political fear and suspicion. The shadow of the Red Scare loomed large over Tinseltown, and no star, director, or writer was immune from the paranoia that gripped the industry. The Hollywood Blacklist, a dark chapter that saw careers destroyed by mere accusations, changed everything. And Cooper, despite his status, felt its weight more than most realized. During the late 1940s and 1950s, the House Un-American Activities Committee, WAC, investigated alleged communist influences in Hollywood. Many actors, screenwriters, and directors found themselves called to testify, forced to name names or face being blacklisted. Being blacklisted meant you were essentially banned from working in the industry, a career death sentence. Though Cooper never publicly opposed the blacklist, whispers suggest he was deeply troubled by the climate of fear and censorship. The pressure to conform was immense. To stay in favor with studios and avoid suspicion, stars were expected to keep quiet or even cooperate with investigations, regardless of their personal beliefs. This political climate created an atmosphere where trust was scarce, friends turned on friends, and careers were destroyed overnight. Cooper's silence during this period may have been a survival tactic, a way to protect himself and those close to him. But it came at a cost. By not speaking out, he also became part of a system that silenced dissent and crushed creativity. Yet, some insiders hint that Cooper quietly resisted in subtle ways. Unlike some stars who fully embraced the studio's demands, Cooper was known for his independent spirit. He avoided political endorsements and steered clear of public controversies. Behind the scenes, he may have helped colleagues navigate the treacherous waters of the blacklist, though this support was kept strictly under wraps. This dual role, both complicit and quietly defiant, adds complexity to Cooper's legacy. He wasn't a loud activist or outspoken rebel. Instead, he played the game carefully, balancing his public image with private doubts about the politics that ruled Hollywood. At the same time, studios were tightening their grip, ensuring that actors not only appeared perfect but also behaved politically. Cooper, like many, had to weigh his career against his conscience. The fear of being branded un-American forced him to make choices that left him conflicted and, ultimately, silent about the true cost of fame during this turbulent time. It's important to remember that these pressures weren't just professional. They were deeply personal. Cooper's relationships, mental health, and creative freedom all felt the strain. This political oppression wasn't a distant issue. It was woven into every audition, every contract, every public appearance. The Hollywood Blacklist era revealed a darker truth. Fame came with strings attached, and sometimes those strings were tied to fear and silence rather than freedom and expression. Gary Cooper's experience is a vivid example of how even the brightest stars were not immune to the harsh realities of power and politics. But the story doesn't end here. There were rumors and hidden pressures beyond just politics. Stories about censorship, addiction, and struggles that never made headlines. What happened behind the scenes in Cooper's life might surprise you, and we'll uncover that next. While Gary Cooper's public image was one of strength and composure, whispers and rumors told a very different story, one filled with unseen pressures that shaped his life behind the scenes. Hollywood's facade often hid these complexities, but as more sources come to light, a clearer picture of the private battles Cooper faced is emerging. Rumors about Cooper's struggles with addiction have circulated quietly for years. While never confirmed, close acquaintances hinted that he sometimes leaned on alcohol to manage the stress and loneliness that came with his stardom. In an era when such issues were taboo, especially for a star with Cooper's reputation, admitting these struggles could have been career suicide. The studios and media kept these whispers under wraps, but they add a human dimension to a man often idealized. These unseen pressures weren't just about substances. Cooper was also reportedly caught in a web of censorship that extended beyond politics. The studios not only controlled the public image of their stars, they shaped the very roles actors could take and the stories they could tell. For Cooper, this meant navigating scripts and contracts that limited his creative freedom and forced him into roles that fit the hero mold rather than challenging his range. Behind the scenes, Cooper faced pressure to conform to a particular image, stoic, morally upright, and unshakable. This image was profitable, but also suffocating. Friends and insiders recalled moments when Cooper expressed frustration with the lack of authenticity Hollywood allowed. He wanted to be seen as a real person with flaws and struggles, but the system demanded perfection. Additionally, whispers suggest that Cooper was caught in some of Hollywood's more secretive and damaging scandals, ones that were carefully hidden from the public eye. Though details remain murky, the pressure to stay silent about these incidents weighed heavily on him. His silence may have been less about personal shame and more about protecting others or preserving the fragile reputations of those involved. On a personal level, Cooper's private life was reportedly strained. His marriage faced challenges, in part because of the emotional toll his career and public persona took on him. The loneliness that came with being a star in such a controlled environment left Cooper isolated. Even surrounded by people, he often felt disconnected, trapped behind the carefully constructed image that Hollywood demanded. What's striking is how these rumors, while unsettling, also humanize Cooper. They reveal a man caught between the demands of fame and his own need for freedom and authenticity. The pressures he faced were a reflection of the wider Hollywood system, which prioritized control and image over well-being and truth. And it wasn't just Cooper. Many stars of the era faced similar unseen battles, but few spoke about them. Cooper's choice to stay silent for so long reflects the complexity of navigating an industry where vulnerability was a liability. As new interviews and rare footage surface, we're finally seeing hints of Cooper's true feelings, his subtle act of rebellion, his quiet discontent, and the cost of maintaining an untouchable image. But these pressures weren't only personal. They connected to the larger story of Hollywood's dark side. Next, we'll explore the true cost of that perfect image and the sacrifices Gary Cooper made to keep it intact. Gary Cooper's career thrived on a carefully crafted image of the steadfast, heroic figure, the man who faced every challenge with calm and courage. But maintaining that perfect persona came at a heavy price, one that few fans ever saw or understood. Behind the scenes, Cooper paid deeply for the facade that kept his star shining so brightly. The studios didn't just cast him in these roles. They demanded that he live up to them in real life. Every public appearance, every interview, and every relationship was scrutinized and often managed. Cooper was expected to embody the ideals his characters represented: moral, strong, reliable. There was little room for error or complexity. This expectation forced him to bury his doubts, his fears, and the parts of himself that didn't fit neatly into that heroic mold. The real Gary Cooper, the man with vulnerabilities, uncertainties, and flaws, had to be hidden behind a mask. This wasn't just personal sacrifice. It was a constant performance that drained his spirit. One of the costs was isolation. To protect the image, Cooper had to keep people at a distance. Emotional openness could be misinterpreted or used against him by studios or gossip columns. This led to loneliness, as many stars of the era found that maintaining the image meant sacrificing authentic connections. Professionally, the pressure to stay clean and wholesome limited the roles Cooper could take. Studios preferred him in parts that reinforced his image rather than roles that challenged him or showed complexity. This creative restriction stifled an actor who had more to offer, leaving him sometimes frustrated and trapped. Even as Cooper aged and Hollywood changed, the expectations didn't. He struggled with a shifting industry, where new kind of stories and stars emerged, but he was still tied to an image that belonged to an earlier time. That tension made it difficult for him to adapt or fully express himself. Perhaps most painful was the need to stay silent about the industry's flaws and his own struggles. To protect his career and the people around him, Cooper chose not to expose the darker realities he witnessed. This silence wasn't just about self-preservation. It was about playing a role that Hollywood demanded, one that kept the machine running smoothly. Those who knew Cooper spoke of his kindness and professionalism, but also of a sadness that seemed to linger beneath the surface. The price of the perfect image was a private sorrow that few could see, but that shaped the final decades of his life. Looking back, Cooper's story highlighted a broader truth about fame. The public often only sees the surface, but the cost of maintaining that surface can be immense. The hero we cheer for on screen can be fighting battles far from the spotlight. Gary Cooper's legacy is not just about the films he made or the roles he played. It's about the silence he kept, the sacrifices he made, and the complex man behind the mask. But finally, after years of silence, Cooper began to break through. He hinted at the truth behind the image and what Hollywood's dark side really meant for him and others. The revelations would shock many and challenge long-held myths. What came next changed the way we think about Gary Cooper and Hollywood itself. For decades, Gary Cooper remained quiet about the darker aspects of Hollywood, the pressures, the politics, and the personal costs that defined his era. But in his later years, something shifted. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, Cooper began to peel back the layers of silence and share what he had long kept hidden. This wasn't a dramatic public statement or an explosive tell-all. Instead, it came in small, candid moments during interviews and conversations with trusted friends and journalists. He started hinting at the emotional toll the industry had taken on him, the loneliness behind the spotlight, the compromises he was forced to make, and the harsh realities he had witnessed but never discussed. One of the most striking revelations was Cooper's acknowledgement of Hollywood's ruthless control over actors' lives. He described how studios dictated not only the roles they played, but also how they were expected to behave in public, how to keep quiet about personal struggles, and how to avoid controversial topics. For Cooper, this was a prison disguised as fame. He spoke about the cost of perfection, the pressure to maintain an untouchable image even when it wasn't true to who he really was. This candidness was rare at the time, especially for someone of his stature. It showed a vulnerability and honesty that many hadn't expected from the famously stoic star. Cooper also touched on the impact of the Blacklist era, the fear, suspicion, and division that fractured Hollywood. Though he never directly condemned the Blacklist, his words revealed a deep discomfort with how fear had silenced so many voices and destroyed careers. He expressed regret that he hadn't done more to help those caught in its grip. Perhaps most surprising were his hints at the personal toll, the loneliness, the hidden struggles with anxiety, and the burden of carrying so much alone. These admissions challenged the myth of Cooper as the flawless hero, and instead painted a picture of a man trying to survive an unforgiving system. These moments of breaking silence were brief and often overshadowed by his enduring star image, but they opened the door to a more nuanced understanding of Gary Cooper. They showed that even the greatest stars are private battles, and that Hollywood's dark side is real and deeply felt. Since Cooper's passing, more stories have emerged from those who knew him, adding layers to his legacy. Interviews, letters, and memoirs reveal a man who quietly resisted in his own way, who cared deeply but was trapped by the very industry that made him famous. His decision to finally speak out, even subtly, encouraged a broader conversation about the hidden struggles of actors, the cost of fame, and the price paid for silence. It also inspired a new generation to look beyond the glamour and question the real impact of Hollywood's power structures. Gary Cooper's breaking of silence is a reminder that behind every iconic image lies a human story, complex, painful, and often untold. His courage to hint at these truths, even late in life, changed how we remember him and how we understand Hollywood's golden age. But the story doesn't end there. The legacy of Cooper's silence and the revelations that followed continue to influence Hollywood today, shaping conversations about fame, mental health, and industry pressures. Gary Cooper's journey through Hollywood's golden age was far more complex than most ever realized. Behind the iconic roles and the calm, heroic presence was a man grappling with immense pressures, political, personal, and professional, that shaped not only his career but his entire life. His story reveals the hidden cost of fame and the dark side of an industry obsessed with perfection. Cooper's silence wasn't just about protecting himself. It was about surviving in a world that demanded conformity and punished vulnerability. For years, he carried the weight of his struggles alone, balancing the expectations of studios, the fear of political persecution, and the private battles that few understood. When he finally began to break that silence, it was subtle but powerful, a reminder that even the strongest heroes have cracks. This story is a call to look beyond the glitz and glamour and remember the real people behind the star power. It challenges us to question the systems that reward silence and to recognize the toll they take on those caught in their grip. Gary Cooper's legacy isn't just the films he left behind. It's the quiet courage it took to endure and eventually reveal Hollywood's dark truths. Today, as Hollywood continues to evolve, the echoes of Cooper's experience remain relevant. The conversations about mental health, industry pressures, and the cost of fame are more urgent than ever. His story encourages us to demand honesty, empathy, and change in how we view and treat those who entertain us. If there's one thing Gary Cooper's life teaches us, it's that silence can be both a shield and a prison. But breaking that silence, no matter how quietly, is the first step toward healing and understanding. Thanks for watching. If you found this story eye-opening, don't forget to like and subscribe for more deep dives into Hollywood's hidden histories. What do you think about Cooper's story? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We love hearing from you.